This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 735, and this week we're going to be doing our last show prior to the summer break, and we welcome longtime friend of the show and frequent guest Don Weeks. Don will be talking about his chapter in the ACGIH Bioaerosols second edition on developing a bioaerosol sampling plan. Plus, we're going to talk about highlights from Indoor Air 2024, ASHRAE's AIHA's MOU, and the Global IEQ Alliance. So before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. And after the show, you can continue the discussion on afterthoughts.iaqradio.com. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, at AIHA.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, at IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at EIA-USA.org. Actionable Insights at getinsights.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to John Lapotere, Indoor Air Quality Solutions in Sanford, Florida, who was first to identify that the word mononymously means to be known by only one name. Here's today's IAQ Radio trivia question. What did these three scientists, Reddy, Spallanzani, and Pasteur, try to prove or disprove? Back to you, Joe.
All right. Don Weeks started in the industry when he was 10 years old and now has over 48 years of comprehensive consultation expertise and project experience in the implementation and management of inspections for hazardous materials. As a certified industrial hygienist and certified safety professional, he has served as an environmental health and safety professional for various international corporations, and he also has a long history of dedication to and service with numerous industry associations. Welcome back, Don. Always great to see you.
Good to see you both.
So you've been in the industry 48 years. That makes you 58 years old now. And
I wish.
I think, have we had you on since you kind of retired here?
Yeah. A couple of times. I was a fill-in once where unfortunately you didn't have the individual couldn't attach, and you said, "Oh, Don, would you mind stepping in?" And then myself and Cliff had a long discussion about a number of items, and I've been on. I can say I've been retired 5 years ago, so I think I've been on.
Is it that long now? Wow.
Yeah, time goes by quickly. I retired right before the pandemic, so that kind of gives me a gauge of how long it's been.
Okay, but you're still very involved with all these industry associations and ASHRAE, AIHA, ISIAC. Who did I know? The Global IEQ Alliance, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm still involved as a full-time volunteer. Basically, don't get paid for any of that, but I basically enjoy the meetings and the trips that I do as a volunteer.
Cliff and I know that feeling really well, actually. Don, let's start with ISIAC's Indoor Air 2024. I know you're just back from Honolulu, Hawaii, tough life, doing conferences in these terrible, dingy, dungy places. So what was Indoor Air like, and what were the highlights?
Well, I mean, it wasn't as dingy as you might have imagined, but we did have a good time. We did have a good time there. It was quite a setup at the conference center, and I enjoyed it very much. There was over 900 individuals there at the meeting, and that's a record for them, I believe. They put on a very good show for over the three and a half days that we were there. And some of the highlights, basically, for me, it was interesting. The type of preliminary speakers that we had were more oriented towards what I would call public health than occupational health. And very interesting to see their discussions about social, physical, and mental health services, and specifically the inequity that takes place between certain parts, in particular the United States, but other countries as well. These ability to get these services is limited in many areas of the United States and in other countries, and so their health deteriorates quicker. You have more cases of asthma in say the South Bronx than you would if you just go across the bridge, the Triborough Bridge, and you're in the Upper East Side. It's like double the amount of people who are suffering from asthma. Just giving you just one example. But particulate matter is a big issue right now, particularly with the wildfires that are taking place. And these are not just, we tend to look at it just as North America, but it's all over the world, quite frankly, that they're having problems with this, and it's becoming a major issue. Another one that was really quite interesting to me was sleeping comfort and bedding. There's a lot of study now going on about what can be done to minimize the thermal issues, particularly with regards to bedding. And it's an important thing, because if you don't get adequate sleep, you're not physically well, to say the least. A reoccurrence of one that's been going on for many, many years is carbon dioxide is still an issue, and we have quite a few papers on that. And then a chemical I had not heard very much about before, but called parabene. Apparently is widespread in terms of problems, particularly in the Asian countries, and the exposures to that can be quite severe. So those are some of the ones that I can say definitely were major contributors to the conference.
What is parabene?
Yeah, that's what I was going to. No, that's exactly.
For?
Did you look it up, Cliff?
No, I didn't. No, not yet.
No, basically it's one of those in between chemicals. In other words, it's not a raw material and it's not a finished product. It's something in between. And so the parabene is used in a variety of different products, and can be quite dangerous to deal with, and not necessarily as a finished product, but in the manufacturing of the product, to say that that's where you have some of the issues that are up there. So let me pull up parabene, and I'll send you something in the chat too.
Thanks.
That would be great. Don, I'm always curious to know if there were any sessions that our remediation contractor audience would be interested in. Is anybody doing any research on remediation effectiveness, remediation techniques, remediation technology?
Well, there were two representatives from the remediation industry there, one from IRCRC and the other one from RIA. And they both participated in a workshop which title was, "Should Surface Cleanliness and Hygiene be considered as an independent IEQ factor?" And I thought that was a very interesting way of approaching it. You don't necessarily look just at what's in the air, but you look what's on the surface and how clean it is, and is that an IEQ factor or not? And then IICRC did a presentation on industry standards for cleaning effectiveness, current and future developments, and supplemental cleaning with gas-fired air cleaning. So, and the impacts of HVAC cleaning on energy consumption and indoor air quality. So there were a number of sessions that were specifically oriented more towards the remediation contractor and their issues.
Are there any researchers? I mean, it's always been frustrating as hell to me that researchers just don't care about it. In my opinion, they don't care about remediation, and they don't research remediation. Like you just mentioned, yeah, there was remediation discussion, but it was from RIA and IICRC. Why is it so hard to get researchers interested in that topic?
Well, I think you probably know the answer, which is a lack of funding.
Okay.
Remediators should develop their own research agenda and offer grants to researchers to undertake the research as listed. Right now, with lack of funding, researchers, that's what their second job really is just getting grants. Okay, and then they actually do the research once they have the grants. But right now, there's just not that much from the if I were to say that IRCRC, RIA, NATCA, and a whole bunch of other remediation specialists come in with a research agenda that lists what it is that they'd like to have looked into from a research viewpoint, and then offer grants to do that, I think you would find it to be a lot more research being undertaken at that point.
Interesting. Cliff, anything you wanted to add?
No, actually, that may happen. Actually, I was talking to an IICRC board member, Daryl Paulson, the other day about some other matters, and he had asked me, and they wanted to do research, had put some money away, and actually had spent some money on research. I don't think wisely, but in any event, he asked me, and I told him exactly what you said, Dawn, and I'm glad that because I think that they do have funding money available, and I just love the idea of putting out the agenda of what you're looking for and then offering grants. I think what sort of grant does it take, you think, to get interest?
It doesn't take much.
Okay.
Basically, many of the what I would call PhD candidates are looking for theses to do. And if they have a thesis that they feel is going to be strong, they will work at a relatively reduced rate. Okay. Now, if you want to get the top-notch researchers to do that's a whole different deal. But I would say probably close to 25–30% of the people who were at the conference that I was just at, Indoor Air 2024, are just in the process of developing their own thesis and doing work in that area. But they look for grants. They're going to go. They go where they know there's money. If there's no reason, then it's very difficult to do that. And so I would suggest the research agenda would be a good starting point.
Thank you very much.
Interesting. Hey, Dawn, another quick thing that you mentioned to us and I wanted to get into before we go into the Bioaerosols book is the AIHA ASHRAE Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. I believe that's the correct what that acronym stands for. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's an interesting process to get an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, between two of these groups. You guys have been around long enough to know that on occasion, these two groups have clashed, to say the least. But they are the gold standards for their respective field. The AIHA is the area, the organization that industrial hygienists want to be a member of, because it is the biggest and it is the best in terms of what it does. ASHRAE is the same way. AIHA emphasizes health issues, with regards to a thorough inspection of the facility in question and sampling. ASHRAE emphasizes the mechanical system in a building, filtration and proper placing of the intake and return. And so working together makes a lot more sense than working apart. I personally have been dealing with ASHRAE standards for a little over 25 years, and I was often very much alone with regards to membership. Now we're looking at having a number of different organizational changes that will allow us to interact a lot easier in terms of publications, in terms of articles in the magazines, in terms of meetings, perhaps in terms of seminars and webinars. Working together, I think, will do a much better job in helping people deal with the indoor air quality problems that exist.
And both of those groups have money for research, I believe. So maybe we'll see more, like what we discussed earlier, a little more research in those areas.
I think so, but you're right. For specifically, ASHRAE has its own, what is known as the RAC committee, the Research Administration Committee, which basically deals with up to $2 million a year in grants. And so there's a substantial amount of money there that could be utilized to look into issues that are on this research agenda we just talked about.
So once IICRC gets their agenda together, it would be a great idea to make sure the folks at AIHA and ASHRAE are aware of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and it has to go for the right channels. Like any large organization, which ASHRAE in particular is, you have to send it to the right person, to the right group, so that you can be fairly certain that you're going to get evaluated by the group and determine whether or not it's a grant that they will be granting at that point.
All right, one more miscellaneous topic, and then we'll get into the bioaerosols. The Global IEQ Alliance. Let's get a little update on there. What's going on with that group, Don?
Well, I've rolled off as president. I was the president for 7 years.
Wow.
And so we're now looking for a new president. Interim president is someone Bill Bonfleck.
Yeah.
But we're looking to see if he wants to take it on full time, or if he's been busy in a number of other items, which you're well aware of, I'm sure. So it will be interesting to see if he does take on that, or if there's someone else who will step up to take it on. The two things that are happening right now in the Global Alliance is they have a new engineering glossary, which basically takes the terms and other abbreviations from the engineering field and puts it in a glossary, which will be soon updated to the IAQGA webpage, and will be free. So for those who are interested in learning what those acronyms mean and what those terms mean, that would be a great place to go. And in the works is a consumer guide to IEQ, which it's not just strictly IAQ, it's IEQ. And we expect that will come out before the end of the year.
Okay. And if you could quickly mention some of the organizations that are part of that alliance.
Yeah, one of them is ASHRAE, one of them is AIHA, REVA, which is basically the ASHRAE equivalent in Europe. The AIVC, which is an organization that deals with ventilation, specifically in infiltration. There's an Italian group. Basically, I'm not going to try and say what that name is, but they're very much active, involved. We have groups from Portugal. Basically, there's 13 groups that are full members and 2 that are affiliated members. We represent in 4 different continents: South America, North America, Europe, and Asia. And we have between all the organizations, there's somewhere around 250,000 members that are basically part of those organizations and send representatives to the various meetings of the IAQGA.
All right. Now, let's roll into the Bioaerosols second edition. First, I got a comment here. First things first, the new Bioaerosols is excellent. Definition of science heavy, referenced, not a mold tester or mold inspector friendly document. I guess I could go along with that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I've only been a CIH since 1982, so I don't know if I can actually talk for the entire industry in that regard, but I've encouraged many people over the years that have started out in the area of indoor air quality and mold investigations and ask them and encourage them and actually help to tutor them in terms of becoming CIHs. And I can honestly say that I think I will have some success with that. Now, do I think it's the only way? No, there's certainly other ways that people can be involved in this. But I do think that there has to be some backing by someone who's actually took the time to get the certifications that are out there. I'm not looking to exclude anybody. Anybody who feels that they have done very well with regards to getting involved and getting experience in indoor air quality and mold remediation and mold investigations, I welcome them to read the book and take what they can from it to apply to the situations that they find themselves in.
Now, your chapter, you participated, I think, in helping and reviewing with several, but the big one is developing a bioaerosol sampling plan. I was looking through the first edition and the second edition here, trying to compare the two, and it seems like there's quite a bit of additional information. What are the biggest changes from, the old 1999 version here and the most current version?
Well, you've hit on what exactly has been the major change, which is that it's updated from 1999 to 2024. It's there was a lot going on in 1999, but if you will recall, just shortly after this book came out, they had the early 2000s was the mold rush, where we had people running around doing sampling in every possible location. There were lawsuits. There was a lot of interest in particularly mold, and not in many other aspects of indoor air quality, but definitely that area. And so things have changed since then. There's still issues with regards to mold, and certainly that's something that is part of the bioaerosols area. But if you read the book, you'll see that it goes way beyond mold in terms of other types of exposures and different types of bioaerosols that are out there. So our expansion really had to do not just specifically with this particular chapter, but with the entire book. And that's why it took us 5 years to do. And we had some of the world's experts in terms of doing that. I'm not a world expert, for example, in endotoxin, but we got somebody who was. One of the ones that I thought was really, really interesting and very new is bioterrorism. So the book itself is very, very new. We thought we were going to do an update. We ended up doing a whole new book. In my particular chapter, it was emphasis on the thorough inspection of the site and less emphasis on sampling. So my area was to look at that and say findings from the observations made by an experienced inspector that can lead to sampling, in terms of verification, but it isn't it isn't necessary to run into the house or to the building or to the school or any place else and start setting up samples right away. Let's do a thorough inspection of the site, and that's what the emphasis is in this chapter that I wrote on developing a bioaerosol sampling plan. The first half of it really just says, do you really need to do sampling? And and really, if you do, you need to do a hypothesis and you need to do a sampling plan, but you don't need to start with a whole bunch of sampling. Do the thorough inspection first. And I think when Jack, I'm calling him John now because they wrote that on his name tag instead of Jack Springston. John Springston. I had no idea who that was.
Who's that guy?
Who is that guy? Jack Springston. He basically said it not too long ago. He basically said, don't do sampling until you know what you're sampling for. And I believe that. And I've always taken the philosophy that I would never take a sample, and this is true not just in indoor air quality, but in industrial hygiene in general, is basically never take a sample you don't already know the answer for. Basically you have to live with the answers that come from the results. And if you don't know what's going to come, and you're surprised by it, then you didn't do a very good job of figuring out what to do in terms of bioaerosol sampling plan. And so that's the big difference that I see in my particular chapter.
I recall back in the early 2000s, and it wasn't just the mold testers who were doing a lot of sampling. I recall interviewing Phil Moray, who did thousands of samples across buildings all around, and
yes,
I'm wondering if.
And he was a big contributor. He was a big contributor to the ACGIH book. So basically, yes, his philosophy was to take more samples than to take less. But I knew Phil reasonably well, and I think by the time he, unfortunately passed away about 10 years ago now, I think he'd come around to the idea that he didn't need to do as many samples as he had done in that courthouse in Florida, or as it turned out, the Hawaii hotel that I stayed in, and other places. Yeah. So he had come around. I agree with you that was the emphasis at the time. I myself, did a lot of sampling at that point, and but I learned over the years that it's not in your best interest to do that. It's really more of along the lines of what can you do to basically help to eliminate the problem, which is basically keep the water out and prevent the mold growth to begin with. And I think that's really what we're emphasizing more than anything else right now.
And I think the industry has come a long way along those lines. Back in the 90s and 2000s, the industrial hygiene people, they weren't that familiar with building science. Let's face it, they knew how to sample, they knew how to test for PELs and TLVs and all that stuff. And I think that's kind of what they went to, what they knew.
Yes.
But
my background in industrial hygiene is basically that. I did a whole bunch of sampling, and in industrial facilities for a variety of different chemicals, variety of different dusts and things of that nature. So you're right. That was our background, and that's what we knew. It took a lot of effort to basically figure out if that was what we need to do with microbial, and it turned out it did. It was a different animal altogether. And one of the key things was that there wasn't a threshold limit value. There wasn't a permissible exposure limit for these particular 10,000 or whatever number of different types of microbials you had out there. So you had to go and approach it in a different way, and that's what we're doing now.
I think it's refreshing to see that, and I think it's also refreshing to see more of an emphasis in the industrial hygiene and even in the safety world on the root cause of things and learning more about building science and finding the root cause and fixing that root cause. I mean, that's where I feel like consultants can bring real value is in helping with that area. But that's just my opinion.
I will throw a shout out to Joe Stiebrick, basically, who doesn't really need it, but I'll do it anyway. Basically, he changed people's viewpoint. The first time I had Joe talk was at a Connecticut River Valley section of AIHA back in 2000, I think. Actually, it was 2001. It was right after 9/11. And he came and he talked about building science, and it just opened people's eyes. You know, and he sang his Beverly Hillbillies song, if you remember that one. But he was also very serious about what he was talking about in terms of building science, and it really changed people's viewpoint in terms of that. And I think a lot of other groups in engineering, in research, and other related fields have changed considerably since that time frame. And I think that's what really this book is all about, is how change has occurred.
And I give RIA a lot of credit in that area too, because they reached out to Joe Stiebrick and others and brought them in regularly and educated their membership or there would be members there on those issues. And I think we've made a lot of progress. But anyway.
Just to go back and clear up a little item, the parabenes are a family of related chemicals that are commonly used as preservatives in cosmetic products. Oh. So that's where we get the parabenes, and it can be bad at times. Okay, you're getting kind of a endocrine disruptor is what they call it, an endocrine disruptor, and it can cause serious health harm.
Interesting.
I had not heard of it before I basically went to this conference.
Cliff, that's an area you're a little familiar with, I think.
I understand preservatives. I'll do some research on it. I'm not familiar with that class, but I would probably be more familiar with the brand name products and so on and so forth that
agreed
would be used. Yeah.
Let's do this before we get too deeply into the bioaerosols. Let's stop and thank our sponsors for halftime, and then the whole second half we want to go into this bioaerosols and the sampling chapter. And I got a whole bunch of questions that I know Dawn has diligently prepared for. We'll be back after our break here with this week's guest, Dawn Weeks. Our association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World, AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Actionable insights, no more mistakes, no more missed line items in your Xactimate estimates at getinsights.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at bioplanet.com. We're back with Don Weeks. We're going to talk about bioaerosol sampling plans. Don, I got a comment here I got to read. If only Don could scream from all the rooftops, don't do sampling first. Don't sell mold tests. I don't know that you guys are saying don't ever do it, but when you do
No, we're not.
for
We're
the
not
right
doing
reason.
that. What we do, basically, the part of that is important is first. You know, there's other things you can do first besides the sampling, and I think that's what I think I would emphasize in terms of that statement. And it's true. I mean, I try to minimize as many samples as I can and take them only when it makes some sense to prove the hypotheses that I'm trying to prove. If it doesn't, then there's no point in taking the sample.
Now, I don't recall for certain, but I you know, in reading over the second edition, I got the impression there was much more of a focus on surface sampling versus air sampling than in the first edition. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes, I think so. I think that the key really is that the surface sampling has it's a better way in many ways to get right at the contamination. You know, if you're taking air samples, you're capturing whatever gets onto the filter, and it may not necessarily be what you think it is. All right. Whereas surface sampling, you can see right there and there, and you're going to be able to characterize the microbial contamination in that area. You know, chapter 8, I believe, is John Thringston and Ken Martinez. He happens to be on the good old John. They did a great job of talking about that, and they say one of the things that can really make it a difference is that you can take surface sampling in place of air sampling in certain environments, quiescent indoor environments, where air sampling may fail to detect biological contamination. So that's really a critical issue, and I think that's why there is more of an emphasis on source sampling and on surface sampling than there was in the previous book.
And it's separated out air sampling. There's actually 2 chapters, one on air sampling, one on surface sampling. I think there might be a third one too.
There's probably more information, and because there's 28 chapters, and to tell you the truth, I haven't in depth read every one of them at this point, but there's certainly different areas of expertise that is exhibited in the actual chemicals that we talk about.
All right.
Or bioaerosols. Yeah. Go ahead.
Bioaerosol sampling, air sampling, is generally not recommended. One exception is if that there is a source that would not be identified by a thorough visual inspection, which I hear all the time. This is, at least from what I understand, is a common reason for air sampling, especially by home inspectors and people involved in home sales. Somebody may have covered up the mold. They may have just remediated the mold, or just, painted over the mold, or it might be in a wall cavity, or it might be in a crawl space, and they just want to cover their asses, basically. Don, what's wrong with that?
I think that it is common practice to do air sampling in many cases by home inspectors and those involved in a home sale. The issue is that microbial air sampling in certain circumstances, like quiescent environments that I just mentioned, may result in a false negative finding. In addition, the analysis and interpretation of the sample results is often misunderstood, and that could lead to decisions based on these samples that could be inadequate and misleading. I don't say you should stop taking sampling, but I do think you got to think it through. Where do you think the problem is? Is it in the basement? Is it in the attic? Is it associated with the washrooms? And if you just take samples in the living room, the bedroom, and the kitchen, you may completely miss what's happening in the rest of the area of the building. And so, that's on a housing viewpoint, and not because this question focuses on that. But that's also true in commercial buildings and in schools and in institutional buildings and things of that nature. You can get many false negative findings because you just didn't put the sampling in the right place. And then your interpretation may be misunderstood and it may not necessarily lead to great decisions.
All right, Cliff, I want to make sure you get a chance to jump in if you have a question.
No, I'm good, Joe.
All right. Now, let's talk about the difference between a hypothesis and a sampling plan. I know it's pretty, most of our audience understands that, but I want you to kind of go over, if you would, the what is involved in developing a sampling plan?
Yeah, the one comes before the other. The hypothesis comes before the sampling plan. And when you're dealing with microbial contamination in building, you have to look at what the hypothesis is going to say. And generally, I use the definition of the following: a carefully formulated logical answer or explanation to a specific problem or question. Now, if you start with that premise, then you can basically write down what it is that you think the problem is in the building. And then you can say, well, do I need to do any sampling at this point? A sampling can be, developed by the inspector based on the hypothesis, but it's only should be done if it's expected to increase the amount of information that's already documented by the thorough visual inspection. So you do the hypothesis first by doing the walkthrough survey, writing down what you see, take photos, take videos, whatever you want to do. And then you go back and you think through what is the logical answer and explanation for this problem. And if sampling is necessary to basically increase your knowledge, then you need to do a sampling plan in that regard so that you know where you're going to take the samples before you get into the building.
Okay. By the way, I need to clarify. The chapter I was talking about is source sampling, not necessarily surface sampling. Source as in bulk material, bulk liquid, or surface settled dust. So
I'm glad John. I'm glad John jumped in on that.
Yes, thank you, John and Sherry both. I'm not sure who that John guy is, but Sherry, I know.
Yeah.
All right, now an example hypothesis is given. I love when they actually give examples of hypothesis because I think people in the field need some guidance on developing hypothesis. In this case, is the mold growth observed in the building crawl space affecting the air quality in the occupied rooms above? Give us some examples of other hypotheses that could be tested using air sampling, Dawn.
If you do a visual inspection and you're in the crawl space and you're looking at what you think is mold, but you're not sure. It could be effervescence, it could be something else. I mean, who knows what it is really? So the hypothesis basically is, what are we going to do to determine whether or not the visual evidence, the smells and odors that we find in the building, water intrusion that we are able to see, all of that has to be, in some cases, documented. And best way sometimes to do that is to do the air sampling. If you smell something in a particular section of that building, it's likely that that's, where you want to do one of your samples at least. And the hypothesis is that the mold growth is a living growth. And so you will be able to spread it, or you'll be able to spread itself onto other areas. So, and you can test those areas. But you have to remember that you have limits on the air sampling, so that you don't necessarily rely on it, completely. There's other reasons why you may want to do surface sampling, you might want to do bulk sampling, as was already mentioned. But the hypothesis basically is, what are we going to do about the rest of the building when we know there is a problem in one particular area of the building? And sometimes air sampling can help with that.
All right, I love that we do this live because sometimes people make me rethink things a little bit. And one of the things I have not done is tell people how to get the Bioaerosol book. I guess the best way is to go to ACGIH.org and go to their store. But Dawn, do you have any other suggestions?
No, that's the best suggestion. They are the organization that has supported this particular document and will sell the document. I have my copy. I'm not sending that to anybody. But basically, you can get it within a couple days, no matter where you are. So.
Yeah, and it's not cheap, but ACGIH.org. We'll put that in the chat here, and then we'll also make sure it's in the blog we do for each show. All right, now there's a good bit of discussion about using labs and helping you with your sampling plan. But aren't labs part of the reason we have too much air sampling?
Well, it depends on the lab, doesn't it?
Some labs. I left out that word. Some labs.
Some labs. Yeah. Yes, it's true that some of the labs working in this space may lead to unnecessary sampling and analysis. However, I believe that many, not all labs, accredited labs, have CIH that work with the clients to help with the sampling equipment and the type of sampling to be conducted. Keep in mind, all right, that the discussion with the lab occurs after the investigator has developed a hypothesis and has come to the conclusion that air sampling will help to enhance the information about the microbial contamination in the building. So it's not a first step. And another one of these not a first step deals. If you have a hypothesis and you want to test it, you want to basically make sure that you're working, towards the benefit of the building and the owners and the people working in the building, then you talk to your laboratory and say, listen, this is what I'm looking at. What is it that I need to do in terms of sampling? And I had a great friend of mine worked with a laboratory in Connecticut, Jim Kenny, which many of you probably know. He was a CIH. And he knew exactly what I was talking about. He knew what I was trying to prove, and he helped me to pick out which sampling we should use and what type of sampling to be conducted. And it was extremely helpful in that regard.
Okay. All right. Now, under the section on decisions involved in determining where to collect samples, it says select one or preferably greater than or equal to 3 samples per location: complaint, high exposure area; non-complaint, low exposure area; outdoors. That's a lot of sampling.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, basically go back and look at what it says. It says you can do 1 if you know what you're looking for, but if you prefer to do more, that's fine. But I mean, remember that the sampling is air sampling in particular, not other types of sampling. Air sampling in particular is just an indicator of what the problems may be. So you can take more samples, and some people do. You can take no samples, which we know there are people who do that too. And as long as they're trying to prove their hypothesis and have enough information to do that, I don't have a problem with that. You mentioned surface sampling as being one way of collecting that, and that's true. Again, though, it's, when I do surface sampling, when I did sampling, I don't do it anymore, but basically the number of samples to be collected, I usually talked in close consultation with the laboratory to plan a bulk sampling program. So it's also true with surface sampling. So Chapter 8 talks about source sampling, and this is one of the things that we're trying to emphasize. So it should be based, how many surface samples you take should be decided based on the visual inspection as well as discussions with the laboratory. And then that's included in the sampling plan. You don't go back out and take visual or take source sampling or do any type of surface sampling unless you've already talked to the laboratory about what it is that you want to see from these particular samples.
One of the issues with doing surface sampling is that you're taking, 1 centimeter, 1 square inch sample of an area that might be thousands and thousands of centimeters or square inches, whatever the case may be. Are there times go ahead.
If you're in an environment with thousands and thousands of centimeters of mold, I would suggest you get the hell out of there. Okay?
Well, no, I'm not talking about mold. I'm talking about surface area.
Surface area, I agree. But remember, most of the surface sampling that you're doing is on something that you believe could potentially be a mold or other type of microbial. So you're dealing with things that are basically visually likely to be a problem. And you take the sample to verify that that is the case. If you're taking samples on walls that don't have any type of discoloration or water intrusion, then put it in your sampling plan as to why you're taking those particular samples. I don't recommend taking samples of what I would consider to be non-affected sampling. But at the same regard, if I'm having a large group of large area that looks like it could be a mold area or other type of microbials, certainly taking some source sampling or doing some surface sampling is better than not taking the samples, and it will help to include what you want to have done in terms of the remediation plan.
All right, and this also becomes an issue on post-remediation verification when you're trying to verify that surface has been cleaned. And in the chapter on the air sampling, you talk about randomized sampling locations. I wonder if you could just go over that with our audience a little bit, how to choose sample locations.
Choosing sample locations is based on the visual inspection that you do, first of all. And if you're doing it in PRV mode, you're looking to basically verify that everything has been cleaned successfully. So you're trying to prove a negative, and that's very difficult to do in many cases, but it's at least an attempt to come up with some way in which you can say to the building owner, you've done everything you can to reduce the exposure in this area. There is another document that I'm going to mention. It's AIHA Guideline 3 on post-remediation verification, which was reissued in 2021. And one of the things they state in there is there's no recognized numerical guidelines or standards from a competent authority for the interpretation of lab analytical data from microbial samples. So the only thing we are doing is basically looking at indoor samples versus outdoors in most cases, or in some cases, concerned versus non-concerned reference areas. So I've participated in the update of that guideline. I recommend that anyone who's interested in looking at PRV, that they pull that document up. I think it's relatively inexpensive from AIHA's website, which would be AIHA.org as well. So that would be where I would go in terms of getting that information.
Okay, and I've got a text in here that I think is a good one. You can also collect a bulk sample on the HVAC filter. Now, this would be during your initial investigation to determine if there is a problem or not, I'm assuming. And that would be especially good if you have the filters changed on a regular and frequent basis. Mm-hmm. I haven't done much filter sampling over time, Dawn. How do you do that, number one? And secondly, how often have you done it?
Not very often at all, quite frankly. The main thing I do with mechanical systems and filters and things of that nature is I turn to my very able partner, who's a mechanical engineer, Lanshee Nguyen, and say to her, what do you think? And she gives me her opinion in this particular area. And even before I knew Lanshee, back in the days when I was in Connecticut and elsewhere, I relied on other people to tell me what they thought. I mean, I have enough to know that MERV 11 is better than MERV 7, but if you told me what is the specifics as to why it's better, I'd go to the mechanical engineer and say, what do you think? Should we sample this or not? And then I go on to guidance and put that in my sampling plan. So you're basically putting, you're saying, well, I'm taking a bulk sample because I need to prove this hypothesis in terms of this.
Now, I don't know if you're familiar with sampling these filters or not. Would you use like a cassette and vacuum the filter, or would you cut out a piece of the filter and send it in for?
I'd have to say that I don't really have a good answer to that because I'm not sure which is I would go back to the laboratory in that and say, listen, here's what I would like to do. What do you think is the best way for me to collect it? And they would say either you take a bulk sample of it or you take a scrape of it. But I would not take a sample of the filter unless I knew what it is that the laboratory is going to do with that sample.
Okay. And I've got another comment that what you're saying about PRV is now consistent with the 2024 S520, and it is also consistent with Bioaerosols, the Green Book, AIHA, PRV, and more. So that's nice. And by the way, John Jack Springston here said, you can cut out a piece, but as Dawn points out, you need to discuss that with the lab. All right. Now,
thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Jack. Always great to have you on board. Dawn, PRV sampling is talked about. What are your thoughts on PRV sampling? For instance, when would PRV air sampling be appropriate, if ever?
I think that I've done a number of these samples over the years, outside versus inside, concerned area versus reference areas, and to me, it goes back to what I read before about in guideline 3, which is that, there's no numerical values or standards on this. So what am I doing? And I think the best way is to just basically make an interpretive, approach to this. And that is to do the comparison between the two. My suggestion in most cases is that you make sure that you're doing samples not only in the critical areas in the building, but the critical areas outside the building. So don't put it next to the garbage collection area. Don't put it in don't put it on the roof and then basically put it in the area of the HVAC system. If you can, move it around. And one of the problems that I ran into when I moved up to Canada there are times in the year when you can't do any of this type of sampling, okay, because it's so cold outside. So basically, you do have to be looking at a concern versus non-concern. And we ended up in many cases taking in loading docks and things of that nature, where I could at least make sure that my filters didn't get frozen while they were taking the sample. So you have to be really sure that you know what you're taking the sample for. This goes back to the same approach that I talked about before. Before you take the samples, make sure you know what you're sampling for and why you need to have that information before clearing a particular area. And if you don't have that, then you really shouldn't take the sample.
All right. There was also a discussion of stratified sampling, and I wondered if you could clarify for our audience, what is stratified sampling and when would this be appropriate to use?
This is interesting. This was something that I think I picked up from the first book, and I included it in this book. So I had to go back into my notes and see what was it that I was talking about here. Researchers divide subjects into subgroups called strata based on characteristics that they share. For example, race, gender, education, attainment. For microbial air sampling, stratified sampling, as noted in section 6.3.3, it can document the concentrations in the worst areas for remediation workers. It can include other types of subgroups, such as that are different in specific and important ways, such as part-time versus full-time workers. And it can also, you can also take samples where there's a distinct difference in surfaces and the possibility of microbial contamination in one surface as opposed to another surface. So you can see what stratified means, basically just taking a variety of different things that aren't necessarily what you would normally take, but you can include in the sampling plan to make sure you covered everything in that area.
Also noticed quite a bit on blank samples, and this has always been something that I think it's been a little tough for people, especially people that are on cost-conscious inspections. All right. How important are the blank samples? They obviously add to that cost, and is the cost worth whatever assurance you gain by using them?
I've always been a fan of blank samples because there's very little I can do to correct field sample results once they've been contaminated. And I won't be able to know that they've been contaminated unless I have a blank. Now, is that true in every circumstance? No, of course not. But it's important to basically recognize that it is a quality control measure to ensure that the sample results are meaningful. If you don't do it, you have to document that too. I think the best thing to say is, I didn't take a sample or I didn't add a blank to this particular one because I know that this batch that I have has already been tested in the field and has no contamination. You put that down on your report, I will accept that. But I will have to say that in general, there's an important reason why we do bulk blank samples, not only in indoor air quality areas, but also in industrial hygiene as well.
What about on surface samples? Do you send in a blank on occasion with a blank tape lift, or?
I don't. I would say that's more of a specific. See, that's the difference between air sampling and surface sampling. Air sampling, I have no idea what I'm going to get. It could be whatever's floating in the air that day. All right. And so I want to make sure that I have some way of checking to see that it's not already on my cassettes on that. Whereas bulk sampling, I'm going right up to where the source is. All right. It really can't miss where the source is. Okay, because it's going to be visually and capable of being sampled. So I don't shake bulk samples, or I should say blank samples for bulks or surface samples. Maybe I should, but at the moment that's not what I do.
All right, here's the tough one, Don.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wall cavity samples.
Yeah, I love it.
Good old wall cavity samples. They are discouraged in part because false positives and false negatives are common. The reference is the AIHA Biosafety and Environmental Microbiology Committee Assessment and PRV of Mold in Buildings. It doesn't tell us, I didn't go back to that document and find the original sources, okay? And I don't know if you had a chance to or not, but I'm wondering, do you know how strong is this evidence?
See, here's where you had me stay up until midnight doing all this research.
I'm sorry, Don.
So I went back and looked, and I will disagree with you on one thing, is that
Okay.
there are, at the end of that chapter, this chapter, 1.6, there are additional references, 50 through 56 in the chapter, which support the conclusion of that chapter. So it's not just from the AIHA Bioaerosols Committee were the lead on guideline 3, which I've been talking about a lot today. And that basically, plus the other 6 other references that are there, was why this particular section 6.4.3, told why this type of sampling is not recommended. There's too many limitations on wall cavity sampling. There's no consensus method how to conduct the samples. There's no control or background sampling comparisons for this type of sampling. And if you do that, you're likely to see that interpretation of the results are highly subjective. Some people might say, "Oh my God, I got 1 spore." Oh yeah, okay, that's fine. "Oh my God, I got 10 spores." Okay, great. What does that mean? In comparison to what? So it's not recommended. And those references, I recommend that you go back and take a look at them when you have a chance, Joe, and you'll see that they all come to support that conclusion.
All right, I will do that. Grayson, let's go to the roundup, buddy.
I'm going to basically buy you guys a copy of of it so that you can have it played more than one note.
Dawn, first, let me go to Cliff. Cliff, final thoughts or questions for Dawn?
Yeah, just one, Dawn. Taking outside samples. I mean, I can. I think they're almost in the same category as I think maybe even less important than doing the blanks. I think the blanks test the media, but it can depend on so much outside. Is it night, day? Is it raining? Is there snow? And so on and so forth. Particularly in mold, I just don't know how valuable they really are, because it's just. I don't know if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I will, and I'm gonna agree with what you're saying. It's very difficult for me to justify some of the PRV samples that I've taken over the years, simply because there is so many factors that can be included into that. Now, one of the biggest factors is time of year. If you take this type of sample outdoors during September here in Ottawa and other parts of the country, you're going to get completely overloaded with pollen and other types of materials on these filters, and it's totally useless in that regard. But there are other times when you can see that there is a difference between outdoors and indoors, and maybe that's where we kind of have to deal with that. If we don't want to take samples, okay, if we feel that it's not worthwhile because of the pollen count and things of that nature, again, document that in your report so that somebody 5, 10, 15 years from now can know what it is that you did and why you did it. All right. Otherwise, it just becomes lost in the sands of time, I guess. And I rather that we document these choices that we're making, rather than just leave it out there and say, well, we didn't do it. Well, why? What give an explanation why you did it, and maybe even explain why you didn't take into account the one that is overloaded with pollen. Just say this is not a valid sample from this viewpoint, and therefore I'm not including it as in my evaluation of whether or not this should be reoccupied as a building. So documentation is really the critical issue in terms of this, Cliff.
Before we go, I want to give you a chance to bring up any other key points that I missed from the bioaerosols in your chapter in particular.
Nothing specific, but I do have a plug. I always have a plug, as you know.
All right.
ASHRAE is running is having their every 3-year conference on indoor environmental quality in Montreal, Canada, in September of 2025. And it's the first time it's been back in a while, and I'm very happy to be within commuting distance to where this is going to be held. But it is the primary ASHRAE conference on indoor environmental quality, and it attracted in the midst of the pandemic in Greece, when I went to Athens there were over 400 people there from about 45 nations. So if you can make it to, you can't make it necessarily to Honolulu or to some of the other countries, anybody who's in North America can make it to Montreal. And I recommend that you all do come. I think it'll be a really great conference, 24th to 26th of September, 2025. If you have papers that you want to present, make sure that you get on their website, which I believe is in the ASHRAE. You can look up ASHRAE.org as we've been talking about the various organizations. And that will give you information that if you want to submit a paper or if you want to come and attend the conference.
How far is Montreal from Ottawa?
About 2 hours.
About 2 hours. Okay. 2 hours south?
It's actually to the east.
To the east. Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I've never been there. It will be fascinating to do. I'm glad you mentioned that. Before we go, anything else we missed that you'd like to add, Don, or?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Final thoughts? All right. Well, Cliff, you're good?
I'm good. Thanks.
All right. This is Radio Joe saying thanks so much to this week's guest, Don Weeks. Always great to have Don join us. We get the most up-to-date analysis of things going on in the industry with Don. It's been a little while and it was great to see you again. Also want to mention we're going on vacation. So the Z-Man and I are going to be off for August, or at least a good bit of August. We'll be back in September with the next edition of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm going to send you guys a CD with all these